Is Minecraft scary? That is a question that has eluded many a people. Some say yes, others no. Me personally, no, Minecraft isn't really scary, but it can be unsettling at times, and this can be expanded upon by capable people in order to create genuine fear. You're presumably the only real, living entity in a nearly infinite world that is completely randomly generated. But every once in a while you might get this unsettling feeling, whether it's through a cave sound or a strange interaction, a rare occurrence within the world around you that might make you question if something is happening without your knowledge, just out of your view. Is this strange arrangement of blocks just a coincidence, or were these deliberately placed by an entity who shouldn't have such free will? Why are these mossy cobblestone blocks in this dense forest laid out in a cross? And why are the bone blocks in Soul Sand Valleys constantly laid out in the face logo? Like I said, these strange occurrences resulting from Minecraft's complete randomness lend themselves quite well to stories, myths and creepypastas, morphing these strange occurrences into genuinely fearful encounters. The rise of many popular Minecraft creepypastas over the years, such as Herobrine, Entity 303 and Null can attest to this, as all of these entities are most famous for altering the world people are playing on in some disturbing ways. However, just as these strange occurrences can be used to create fear, they can also be a breeding ground for curiosity, intrigue and mystery. What is really going on here? Because of this, Minecraft ARGs have also seen quite some success stories throughout the years, presenting viewers with many videos on strange sightings within the game of Minecraft, and then subsequently having the viewers figure out codes, puzzles and connect dots between different videos and occurrences in order to establish their own lore surrounding such unsettling occurrences in Minecraft. Now, admittedly, the boundaries regarding what constitutes a Minecraft ARG has maybe become a bit blurry in recent times. Various popular Minecraft video series that seemed like ARGs initially instead chose to diverge from this formula at some point and start using their platform and their videos to tell a more coherent story with a clear message, without the need for the audience to go through trials and tribulations to understand the full picture. That doesn't take away from the fact that these video series can still be incredibly cool to watch, and branching off from their humble ARG beginnings can sometimes help these stories deliver genuinely moving scenes that may have been difficult to pull off within the whole ARG gimmick. In fact, some of my favorite Minecraft video series of recent times have involved such creepy ARG series turned genuinely compelling storyline, such as the stories of Alex Speaks, The Decade and the still ongoing saga of Andrew Gaming 67, as well as the story of Ben2FR, which sticks closer to the ARG style all the way through. I'm also really grateful to YouTubers such as Retro Gaming Now and Render, as I often discover these great stories through their excellent coverage, attempting to understand the mystery or figure out the storyline of these videos. However, the fact that these videos exist to break down every hidden detail in these videos does kind of take away from the thrill of watching these videos nowadays. Not to downplay the excellent coverage, but knowing the answer to all questions is just one click away, it just sets a precedent before I even start watching, you know? I think that's why I get so excited about a new upload from Andrew Gaming. Since it's still ongoing, there's no shortcut to figuring out the meaning of every single artistic or narrative choice. So, imagine my intrigue when randomly one evening, just after watching the newest Andrew Gaming release, I returned to the YouTube homepage to see a strange Minecraft video had been recommended to me. The video's title, Morgengrauen, is in German, which translates to dawn, just as is written in the description. Despite the video having barely any views at the time, I decided to give it a watch anyway. Most of the video consists of some cinematic shots of a player with a dark skin simply playing Minecraft. We watch the player leave his house to go mining, disappearing behind some terrain and then returning in the next shot, pickaxe still in hand. The player then starts building a second floor on his house as the rainy night transitions to day. However, near the end the video takes a pretty strange turn. All of a sudden, the whimsical background music that's been playing throughout the entire video abruptly gets cut off as we smash cut back to a rainy night with a lone crafting table sitting next to a lake. This video seems to hint at a greater mystery yet to be shown, with quite an unsettling atmosphere even before that abrupt cut. So, with my curiosity somewhat stirred up, I headed over to the channel to see if there were any other videos on it. There were 2 other videos at the time, titled Gameplay and Periodic respectively. I decided to give both of them a watch, with Gameplay first as it was the second video uploaded on the channel after Morgengrauen. The title of this video is pretty straightforward, as that is what is shown in the video. Gameplay of Minecraft, this time from a first-person perspective. This particular video lacks any description. We open on a player traversing the landscape. Strange sounds bearing resemblance to heavy footsteps, or maybe even something like gunshots, can be heard in the background, though they eventually get kind of drowned out once the background music fully sets in. As the player wanders through a valley between some cliffs, he spots some cobblestone and mossy cobblestone lining an otherwise fully natural stone wall. This may indicate that there's a dungeon there, however we are never shown whether or not the player actually investigated this structure. What we are shown later in the video is that the player is digging a mine directly below it, scraping the edge of the structure. For most of this video, we see the player settle down and build the house that we saw in the video Morgengrauen, indicating that at least part of this video takes place before that one. However, the video once again takes a strange turn towards its latter half. The player comes across a trail of torches, which leads him to a familiar sight. A lone crafting table sitting by a lake with a random block of oak planks also there along the cliffside. Based on the player's behavior, it doesn't seem like he is the one that placed these items. We then cut to a shot of a crafting table inside of the player's home. We never directly see what he decided to do with the items he found, whether he destroyed them, left them, or brought the crafting table from the lakeside here into his home. Based on the way these clips are stitched together, that last option seems the most likely to me. Whatever the case may be, the player goes back to work on his house, but then we get treated to by far the strangest and most unsettling sequence so far. Just like in Morgengrauen, the background music suddenly gets cut off as we see the player ascend on his way out of his mine. Suddenly he stops and briefly seems to hesitate as to whether he should continue ascending and leave or stay down in the mines. The words, "He's not safe here," can be seen at the top of the screen. The player ultimately chooses to continue ascending and eventually exits the mine. We smash cut to him descending the stairs again, this time frantically blocking the stairway with cobblestone behind him. It's as if he saw something in the night outside once he exited the mines, and is afraid that whatever he saw is now pursuing him. Unfortunately, this seems to be the case. As the player reaches the end of the tunnel and starts digging himself a little panic room, We can hear the faint sounds of blocks being broken in the distance. Then, just as it seems like the player is cornered, this happens. The music abruptly stops completely, and we're seemingly frozen in place. It is unclear whether it is the footage or the player himself that is frozen, but I'd guess that the player is trying to stay as still as possible to try and hide from whatever is pursuing him, as you can clearly still see a couple of slight jerks after the player becomes still. After a couple seconds of complete silence, we suddenly hear the sound of around 3 to 4 blocks being broken very close by, likely being the final pieces of cobblestone the player placed to barricade the stairway before reaching the end and having to start digging to continue his escape. As such, there is now nothing standing between the player and whatever is pursuing him anymore. However, before we can see what follows, the video ends. This video gives us much more to chew on compared to the first one. However, as can be expected from a video so early on in the ARG, it raises much more questions than it provides answers. Of course, the most enticing mystery is the identity of the pursuer. Its capability to break blocks systematically immediately disqualifies any naturally spawning mob, which leaves only 2 possibilities. 1. Another player, and 2. Some kind of unnatural monster created specifically for this ARG, akin to the Raven from Band 2FR. However, the bigger mystery to me at this point is the significance of the crafting table. It has been a pretty central object in both videos, so it must be significant in some way to the events that we see play out. Is there perhaps some relation between the crafting table and the pursuer? I mean, we don't know who or what placed down the crafting table, the wooden planks, and the torches. Based on how our player reacts, it doesn't seem like he's the one that did that. We also do not know how the player got into the position he found himself in at the end, since the start of the chase was cut out. So is there maybe some link between these 2 questions? Did the pursuer place down these items? And since it was implied that the player took the crafting table from the lakeside and placed it into his own home, did the pursuer come here looking for revenge, or to simply get its stuff back, which is how the player got into this situation? However, as I said earlier, we are still in the early stages of the mystery, with a bunch of locks and barely any keys yet, so I think it's best we stop deliberating this video for now, and move on to the next one, periodic. This video starts with the player standing outside of the mine, a red filter briefly covering the screen. It is unclear when chronologically this video takes place. The red overlay and the player backing away from the entrance to the mine seems to suggest it takes place after the end of gameplay, with the player somehow having escaped his pursuer down in the mines. However, as the player turns around and starts walking away from the mine, we can see that his house is not where it's supposed to be, which paradoxically seems to suggest that this video may take place before both gameplay and Morgengrauen. Suddenly, as the player reaches the patch of land where his house is supposed to be, another player walks into view. This player sports an almost all-white skin with purple eyes. From later videos, we can see that our protagonist player sports an all-black skin with purple eyes, in line with the channel's profile picture, immediately creating a strong link between these 2 entities as each other's equal and opposite in some way. For the rest of the video, the 2 players simply stare at each other, neither of them moving nor speaking a word. Sped up footage of the player traveling a long distance across the world periodically fades in and out. However, The first time this happens again after the white player gets introduced, a string of numbers and symbols fades in and out together with the next clip of sped up footage. Now, remember what I said before? How every mystery in every Minecraft ARG I've ever seen has felt a little redundant to actually think critically about, since I discovered all of these ARGs through coverage of other YouTubers going over the mystery. Though I usually watch all the videos of the ARG itself before watching these breakdowns, this still means that I can be pretty confident that these guys will have figured all this out already in their videos. Well, the moment I saw this, all bets were off. This was it, a chance to finally solve one of these mysteries myself. No easy shortcuts through other YouTubers covering the ARG. No commenters spoiling the mystery. Just me and this series of numbers and symbols that, presumably, no one else had solved yet. Needless to say, I was immediately fully invested in this ARG. But this did create a new problem. Since I've never done any mystery solving in this space myself, I know absolutely nothing about cryptography, and so I had no idea where to even start trying to decode this message. So I started with the most basic approach, modular arithmetic, which is basically just a fancy way of saying match the number with the corresponding letter in the alphabet. What about the numbers that are larger than 26? Well, just subtract 26 from that number until what remains falls somewhere between 1 and 26, and then match the number with that corresponding letter. So, using this method, we get Evane.vel. Alright, yeah, that's probably not it. And honestly, with my pea-brain regarding cryptography, that's kind of all I could come up with on my own, so it's safe to say this code stumped me for a few days. I did some googling on different kinds of encryption methods, which, after starting this video, I can confidently say there's a lot. We will get to it. However, eventually I was able to find a promising method. A periodic table cipher is actually pretty simple to work with. It uses the periodic table, where every element is assigned both an abbreviation, most often consisting of 1 or 2 letters, as well as an atomic number referring to the number of protons housed in one atom of said element, ranging from 1 to 118. Conveniently, this range of numbers lines up with the numbers in our line of code. However, what really solidified my confidence in this approach being the right one were the video's title, periodic, as well as the video's description, an ordered arrangement of the chemical elements into rows and columns, which both directly refer to the periodic table. Would have been nice if I had realized that beforehand, but hey, I didn't know you could use the periodic table like this yet. So, using this approach and matching each number with the abbreviation of the corresponding elements, we get github.com/renermkrdi soli/sermgrdi. Still not really intelligible, but I was sure that I was on the right path. Maybe I just didn't do it right. Eventually, I started asking AI tools for some more information on how this method of encoding worked, and one line in particular stood out to me. Quote, if the code includes 1 or 2 letter symbols, like Mg for magnesium or He for helium, determine whether they directly correspond to parts of the message. This motivated me to play around a bit with the order and combinations of specifically the 2-letter abbreviations featured in the code. I had already thought that this part implied that this string, once decoded, would send me to a website link of some sort, which was further supported by the slashes. So I thought, why not remove the small letter G here and see what happens. And when that still didn't give any results, I decided, fuck it, why not remove all the non-capitalized letters and see what happens. And that did it. Once I did that, the decoded string came out to be github.com/remedysol/samedy. GitHub.com is an online platform for software development as well as a repository of open and closed source code for various programs. I actually already knew about this site as I had visited it several times when googling solutions to problems I sometimes experienced when I was working with the program RStudio for my university courses recently, so I immediately recognized the name once I started removing the non-capitalized letters. Remedy Sol is an interesting phrase, possibly providing a hint regarding what we are actually seeing play out in these videos. Interestingly, the channel banner contains a similar string of abbreviations for several periodic elements. When removing the non-capitalized letters here, it also reveals the phrase Sol Remedy. And finally, Samedy is simply the name of the YouTube channel, which in retrospect also seems like a riff on the whole Sol Remedy phrase. The link from the code actually takes us to a page on GitHub, and man, I was so pumped that I managed to actually figure this out on my own. No kidding, this was actually what I looked like in this moment. On this page, there's a message that reads, "Hunger comes in waves," and then a string of gibberish. There's a text file embedded within the word waves, which provides more gibberish, followed by what looks like some kind of translation key. One door has opened, and immediately we run into another. However, let's put a pin into all this code-breaking nonsense and actually return to the videos before we get lost too deep into this business. Even though there were initially only 3 videos on the channel when I started watching, multiple more were released over the following days. The first of which is called The Mines. This is the shortest video so far, at only 17 seconds, and simply shows the player descending a ladder from the surface into the underground, presumably towards the mines that the video is named after. However, even though this video is short, we can still make some pretty noteworthy observations. Firstly, the player seems to have relocated since the previous 3 videos, as both the design of his house and the environment it's built in differ from previous videos. Secondly, we can see a strange red mist filling the screen, just as it did briefly at the beginning of Periodic. However, this time this overlay persists throughout the entire 17 seconds. Thirdly, there is no audio to accompany the footage. Pretty strange, but I can't really think of why this would be especially significant. And on a similar note, the final detail that we can notice from the video is that while initially the ladder way down into the mines is accompanied by the lights of torches, these eventually cease, leaving the player to descend the rest of the way in darkness, possibly into uncharted terrain. However, just like with the lack of audio, it is questionable whether or not this is a significant detail. Interestingly, in the description there is only one word: Hes. What does this mean? Well, I would interpret this as a compressed version of the expression he's. Though this still does not give much information, it might be part of a larger sentence that got cut off, such as he's doing something or he's coming, maybe. Alternatively, it could be a reference to the phrase we saw towards the end of gameplay: he's not safe here. Anyway, like I said, this video is pretty short, so we can swiftly move on to the next video, Terra. The title and description of this video are somewhat puzzling, as unlike all of the previous videos, neither provide a clear reference to anything we see in this video or anything we've seen in other videos. The title Terra could refer to the Earth, but it's not really clear what this is meant to signify. The best I can think of is that the Earth seems to be a place where the protagonist retreats to whenever he feels threatened. The description reads, scoffs and snares wet grass and prayers, which I also have a hard time interpreting. It kind of reads as if it's an excerpt from some kind of poem or something similar. As for the actual content of the video, it appears to bear much resemblance to the first video, Morgengrauen, in that it is made up of a bunch of wide, cinematic shots of our player building. However, it seems as though this video shows the player building back up, presumably after leaving his previous home behind following either his encounter with the pursuer or the white player. Two interesting observations from this video are that 1. The area where the player is building his new house is much flatter compared to the area surrounding his previous home, and 2. The player does not rebuild his previous home exactly, instead opting for a single-story box elevated on some wooden pillars. It's almost as if he wishes to keep a close eye on the area surrounding his home. His house being held up in the air in such a flat area would serve the dual purpose of simultaneously providing a vantage point, as well as the height offering the house some protection from any dangerous visitors. We also see the player installing large windows in his house, further supporting this theory. While most of the video just shows the player building this new house to completion, as can be expected at this point, the video takes a strange turn near the end. Just as the player is putting the finishing touches on the new house, this red mist once again fills the screen. We are taken back to the site of the player's original house, in particular the mine shaft. Rumbling and roars can be heard from deeper inside, bearing a resemblance to the sounds heard at the start of gameplay. However, when we peer down into the mine shaft, the tunnel reaches too far for us to see the end of it. After a couple more seconds of rumbling, heavy footsteps and other strange noises coming from further down into the mine shaft, the video eventually fades out and ends. While most of this video is pretty uneventful, the ending raises more questions, particularly what being is down there in the mine. It's not really that far of a stretch to assume this is the pursuer that was chasing the player at the end of gameplay. However, the sounds coming from the mine shaft suggest that this being is some sort of hulking monster figure, whereas in gameplay the pursuer acted much more like a player, barely making any noise and breaking blocks methodically. As such, it might be that the pursuer and this monster creature are not even the same being. Regardless, we also still don't know the connection between our protagonist and this monster, nor between the protagonist and the pursuer. I theorized earlier that the player taking the crafting table might have something to do with why he was being chased in gameplay, but the dungeon-like structure may also have something to do with it. We saw in gameplay that the player scraped this structure when digging the mineshaft, and as we can see in this video, that block of mossy cobblestone still hasn't been placed back. Is this why this entity is mad at the player? Or does it still concern the whole crafting table ordeal? I'll admit, none of these theories are really anything more than speculation, as we just don't know enough to establish a solid link between all these key players based on what we've seen up to this point. However, I believe the next video, Loss, finally gives us some major clues as to what exactly is going on in this series. This video starts with a couple of static shots showing an azalea tree and a ruined nether portal. You know, pretty standard features of Minecraft nowadays. Except there's one issue. I was under the impression we were watching Minecraft alpha footage or something similar. The whole world looks like very early Minecraft, so what are these new features doing here in this saturated world? I'm not gonna lie, they actually look pretty interesting with these textures. But I'll get back to this. Anyway, following a lightning strike near another ruined portal, this one besides a village, we quickly shift focus back to the POV of the player as he emerges from his new mineshaft, which chronologically means that this video takes place after both Terra and the mines. The red mist, and thus presumably the imminent danger, has seemingly subsided. However, over the next couple of shots as the player rummages through some belongings inside his house, the red mist slowly creeps back in. After the next cut, the screen is now saturated with a red color, seemingly the strongest that this effect has ever appeared on screen. The player is standing in the doorway of his house in the dead of night, looking across the lake. Disturbingly, we can see what seems to be another player standing atop a hill across the lake and staring back. They seem to be sporting a lighter toned skin, but right now they are standing too far away to make out any details. The other player begins descending the hill, presumably with the intent to cross the lake and make their way towards the protagonist's house. However, upon seeing this, the protagonist immediately sprints out of his house and into the dark forest beyond in a seemingly blind panic to get away from this other player. However, these efforts to flee seem fruitless, as for most of the rest of the video we experience a chase. The protagonist is desperately trying to escape the other player, who has quickly caught up to him. The protagonist looks behind him a couple of times, allowing us to get a clearer look at who is chasing him. But bizarrely, it looks like the player chasing him is the same player who approached him in the video periodic. The player with the light skin, contrasting our protagonist's dark skin. However, despite not showing any signs of aggression in that earlier video, here they are now, frantically chasing the protagonist with what looks like a sword in their hands. Despite the wild chase and the protagonist getting sliced by the other player's sword at some point, the red mist eventually subsides between shots, and when the protagonist looks behind him once again, the other player is nowhere to be seen. The protagonist has seemingly escaped. As the sun rises and the rain clears up, the protagonist starts trying to find his way back through the wilderness. However, upon returning back to his house, he finds it burning down, showing the loss that the title of the video alluded to, and the video then ends. So, there's a lot to unpack here. Some aspects of this video, I believe, give us a stronger handle on what is happening in this ARG, while others only raise new questions. I'll start with what I already mentioned, newer features strangely showing up in this old Minecraft version that we're seeing. This is really strange, since the previous videos have shown that we are in a seemingly pretty rudimentary version of Minecraft. So how can these videos exist here? Interestingly, the player has a hunger bar now, which wasn't present in any of the other videos. However, as soon as we cut to the night of the chase, the hunger bar mysteriously vanishes. So what's the deal with this? Glitches? Time travel? Unfortunately, this is a major new question that this video introduces into the mix. So, what about the questions that get answered by this video, as I alluded to earlier? Well, let's take a closer look at the two players that we've seen interacting across these videos. Based on what these videos show, I'm pretty sure that whoever was chasing the player all the way back in gameplay wasn't that monster that we heard back in Terra. It was most likely the white player. When I discussed the gameplay video, I did say it was likely another player chasing our protagonist. However, I refrained from making the connection to the white player in periodic, as he didn't really seem to show any sign of aggression. But now that we've seen him actively trying to kill the protagonist, that option is back on the table, and is also pretty likely, I would say. But wait, why did the white player not try to kill the protagonist back in periodic? Unfortunately, I don't really have an explanation for that. The best I can do is that, since I mentioned before that I struggled pinpointing exactly where in the timeline periodic takes place, this interaction may have taken place sometime before everything we're seeing now, instead of right after gameplay, which I initially thought. Also, we just got done covering that azalea tree and ruined nether portal, which I speculated hint at some kind of something. Like I said, time travel, multiple planes of reality merging, stuff like that. Maybe something similar is going on here that causes this player not to be aggressive with the protagonist in this moment. But now on to the big question, for which I think this video gives us some major clues to answering. What exactly is the relationship between these two players? I've already mentioned that these two players share the same skin, only inverted in terms of color. Well, except for their eyes, but you know. Our protagonist is, dressed in all black, whereas the other player is dressed in all white. I mentioned before how this immediately signifies some connection between these two entities, but up until now I was kind of blanked on how exactly they relate to each other. Well, I think we can figure this out after this video. A key clue that I haven't brought up yet is the description of the video loss. While it initially seems like a random string of letters, you can probably infer that this is another encoded message. However, by the time I watched this video for the first time, YouTube commenter Indomitable Sloth 2437 had already managed to successfully decode the message. How ironic. As it turns out, this message was encoded using a ROT13 or Rotate 13 cipher, which is a type of Caesar cipher. A Caesar cipher is actually one of the simplest encryption methods, as you simply take the message and encrypt it by shifting the alphabet of the encrypted message a number of times. As you might be able to guess, a ROT13 cipher involves shifting the alphabet 13 spaces, and thus replacing each letter from the plain text by the letter 13 places further down the alphabet to encrypt it. Using this method to decrypt the message, Indomitable Sloth 2437 found that the decoded description reads, "He can't run from it because it's always with him." And it's this notion that I think is vital to understanding the relationship between these two players, as well as what we see unfolding in this ARG as a whole. Reading this message, it's pretty easy to infer that he is referring to our protagonist, and what he's trying to run away from is the white player, since that's what we see in the video. But then, what does the phrase, "it's always with him," signify? Well, consider the following. We've established that these players are each other's equal and opposite based on how they look. We know that the white player wants to kill our protagonist, the black player. And we know that this danger comes from within the protagonist himself. So, how does it all make sense? Well, how about if both of these players are halves? Two halves of the same soul. This theory actually makes quite a lot of sense given all the clues we've examined up until now. The phrase soul remedy came up a lot when solving that first code, and perhaps that is what we've seen taking place up to now. Or that's what needs to happen in order for this story to conclude. It may also explain the appearances of the two players and the way they act, particularly in this video. If these two players are two halves of the same soul, how do you think this relates to their appearance? Perhaps the white player embodies all the good aspects of the soul, while the player that we've been following this entire time is all black, embodying all the worst traits. Not to say this player is inherently evil, as we also see many horrible things happening to this player over the course of these videos. Their house burning down, being chased and almost killed multiple times. Maybe that's just his fate, what makes him a blackened soul. In fact, the term dark soul can be used to refer to someone in a state of sadness or who's lost their meaning in life. Also, this would explain why the white player tries to kill the protagonist, since he's the white soul, like a white knight trying to vanquish the evil. After all, a black soul could also be used to refer to someone who's heartless, evil, or lacks compassion for others. Whether our protagonist actually conforms to this definition, we don't know, as we haven't really seen him doing anything that showcased his morals up to this point. I mean, he seems to prefer flight over fight most of the time. However, even if this theory is true, there's still a lot we don't know. If these are two halves of the same soul, what happened to cause their split and separation? Nevertheless, I was finally able to come up with some solid theories following this latest video, and now it's just a matter of whether subsequent videos reinforce or destroy this theory. The next video is called Waves, which should immediately raise an eyebrow, given that when we decoded the message from the video periodic, it led us to the message "Hunger comes in waves," with the word waves even containing an embedded file. So, this word clearly has some significance to this mystery. The description simply contains the word waves as well. However, as for the actual content of this video, there's not much to talk about. This video does stand out from the rest in that it is the first and, at the time of writing this, only video that features footage from the real world. But the video's content is just 32 seconds of footage from a beach, waves crashing down on the shore. Maybe there is something more to this video, involving some audio or visual tools or something, or maybe it serves as some kind of clue for those who have not yet deciphered the code in periodic. Regardless, there's not much to talk about regarding this video, so let's quickly move on to the next one, Navigator. This is the last video from the ARG I'll be covering today, and for this one, I was actually there to see the live premiere of this video. Alright, so here we are for the premiere of the next episode. The Navigator. The thumbnail looks kinda crazy. I don't know, is this just like a waiting screen or is this part of the code as well? Oh, it's counting down? Alright, so let's get ready. Oh, never mind. I'm on my alternative account now. So, you know, even when I comment, here, if that may end up being necessary, you never know. But then they still won't see it coming when Delunka releases a video on it, and I reveal that it was me the whole time. I might have to immediately take back what I said about waves, because this might be the video that is most different from all other videos up to this point. We open on a shot of a pretty big, well-constructed and detailed house in a spruce biome. However, it quickly transitions to this same house, only now it and the surrounding forest are going up in flames, drawing obvious parallels to what happened at the end of Loss. However, it doesn't end there, as we are then shown this same thing happening to other houses. One inside of an oak forest, one inside of a birch forest, and one on the coast. It is unclear whether all of these houses once belonged to our protagonist, the Dark Soul, though this seems likely given the exact same thing happened to him at the end of Loss. I also noticed that the houses get progressively smaller and less detailed, possibly indicating that this is either happening much more frequently, or that the protagonist is just getting more used to this happening, not putting as much effort into building grand and detailed homes, since they all end up burning down eventually anyway. Though we still don't know how exactly these houses end up burning down. Based on what we know, it seems likely that the White Soul is responsible for setting them ablaze. We then see our protagonist in the midst of building a new house in a plains biome next to an old growth pine taiga biome. Interestingly, this video seems to take place in a very modern version of Minecraft, at least compared to everything else we've seen up to now. As the protagonist goes to chop down one of the big pine trees, he spots a torch on another one of the big trees in the distance that he seemingly did not place. As he goes to investigate, he keeps seeing more light sources in the distance, eventually ending up on an old road adorned with lantern posts, which leads him to the ruins of some giant structure. The player is led through a small tunnel into a grand hall. As the player makes his way towards the back of the room, he passes by several arches lining the sides of the room, which house some kind of portals. Interestingly, each arch has a sign plastered on it, upon which we can see a number accompanied by a word, such as signs reading 1, Solasphere, and 5, Harbors. Once he reaches the back of the room, the player ascends some stairs to find a book on a pedestal overlooking the rest of the hall. The first page of the book contains the following text.
We built these walls. We built these halls. But they crumble now. They fade away, and then what we know now breaks apart. And the ruins that are left behind, they are the key.
On the second page of the book, there's a string of numbers reading 7, 4, 8, 3, 10, 1, 5, 2, 9. Whereas I originally thought these to be either coordinates or a code for the viewers, the player himself actually starts connecting the numbers written in the book with the associated words on the signs above the arches. Based on the final message, which the protagonist writes down in the book, we can infer what word each number stands for. 1 is Solasphere, 2 is Your, 3 stands for Hands, 4 and 10 both stand for D, 5 is Harbors, 7 is Follow, 8 stands for Needles, and 9 is Valiance. What about the number 6? Oh, that's a code that we need to decipher right there. Eventually, we see that the protagonist has fully decoded the message and written the translation in the book.
Follow the needle's hands. The Solasphere harbors your valiance.
The protagonist then makes his way out of the grand hall and up a cliff, entering the ruins of a tower. Descending some stairs and ladders inside the tower lands the protagonist in a small room at the very bottom of the tower, where he finds an enchanted compass, such as those attuned to a lodestone. He picks up the compass and we can see that it is named Solasphere. Suddenly, the message from earlier becomes clear. The protagonist is being asked to follow the needle of the Solasphere, aka this compass. The protagonist returns home with the compass to gather his belongings and then sets out to follow the compass's hand. The video ends with the footage fading to black as the protagonist starts traveling the lands. However, just before the video actually ends, we hear an ominous sound. A roar. Nearly identical to the one we heard at the end of Terra. So, what the hell is this then? Suddenly we're plucked from our 5x5 homes in freaking Minecraft Alpha and dropped into this heavily modded modern Minecraft version with giant ruins, portals and magic? Like I said before, this video clashes so hard with all the others we've watched that there has to be a reason for it. Now, admittedly, I don't have any solid evidence for this, but the way I interpret this massive disconnect between this video and the rest is that this is meant to signify that this video takes place far away from all the videos we've seen up to now, chronologically speaking. The way I see it, all these other videos look pretty similar across the board because they take place in relatively quick succession, and this video looking so different means it must take place either far before or far after everything we've covered up to now. My personal guess, far before. Consider the following. By this point we know, or at least speculate, that these two players were once part of one soul. At the very least they're connected on some sort of spiritual level. But a crucial part of the puzzle is still missing. How? How did things end up like this? What happened for things to end up like this? And I speculate that with this video we're being clued in to what happened long before. Here's what I'm thinking. While I have little to no evidence for this, my gut feeling is that something went down at the place where this compass is pointing towards that caused everything we see play out in this ARG. We've still got the monster entity, that thing we heard roaring and stepping around at the end of Terra. What's the deal with that? Now that we have a solid idea on what the deal is with the white player, this video may give us more hints to this other antagonistic force. Maybe whatever this thing is was sealed away at the place the Solasphere is pointing towards, or maybe it's just chilling there, I don't know, and something went wrong when our player arrived there, causing them both to get trapped in an alternate world and the player's soul to be split. Maybe that was even a self-sacrifice on the protagonist's end. However, there is one big flaw with this theory. If this takes place before the soul divide, why is the player already sporting an all-black skin? And my answer to that is, I don't know, this is kind of the best I got right now. Now, let's get back to some actual mystery solving. Like I mentioned before, the protagonist uses the signs with the numbers 1 through 10 and the associated words to solve the code written in the book. However, the number 6 is conveniently omitted from the code. During the video, we see that there is nevertheless a sign with the number 6 on it. However, when the protagonist briefly looks over the sign, we can see that it does not contain a simple word like all other signs, but rather another encoded message. My first knee-jerk reaction was to apply the periodic table thing again, since the numbers again have a wide range between them. However, there are now also letters integrated into the code, which I honestly didn't think much of at first. I thought, oh, maybe we have to add those at the back of the elements we decipher. But that didn't really work. Even when removing all the non-capitalized letters, except the ones specifically included in the code itself, this method just yielded a string of unintelligible letters. I tried putting it as a YouTube link, but that also worked to no avail. So if that's not the solution, what is? Again, I know next to nothing about cryptography, so this also kind of stumped me, just as the previous code did initially. However, just like with that previous code, I believe I have now found a solution to this one as well. Base64 is a popular encryption method in ARGs like this one, basically transforming a letter into binary text and taking groups of a certain amount of binary bits to convert those binary groups back into different letters and symbols. Code encrypted using Base64 is made up of 64 distinct characters. The letters A through Z, with capitalized and non-capitalized letters being considered as distinctly separate characters, the numbers 0 through 9, and lastly the symbols plus, slash and equals. However, there exist numerous alternatives to Base64, which basically function as subdivisions of the Base64 system. One of these is Base16, also known as hexadecimal. As the name suggests, this system only uses 16 distinct characters for encoding messages, still keeping the numbers 0 through 9 and employing the letters A to F, with usually no distinction between capitalized and non-capitalized letters here. If we go back to the actual code itself, you can see that the few letters sprinkled in also do not reach above F in the alphabet, which was a major clue to me that this method could be the answer for solving this code. However, I'm not 100% confident in this being the ultimate solution to breaking the code. Why? Well, putting this string through a Base64 decoder yields the following result, from which you can pretty clearly make out the message break the futef loop. While a majority of the message has now become clear, there's this weird word in there that, as far as I'm able to tell, does not seem to be an intelligible word in any language. So maybe this wasn't the right encryption method after all, and we need to imply another variation of Base64, or perhaps we need another clue to fully understand the meaning of this. A clue that hasn't been revealed yet as of me writing this. Or I just did it wrong, that's always an option as well. Regardless, we can still rely on the rest of the code to already draw some conclusions. Break the loop. This is an important phrase because the only loop that we've seen before, the only instance of events repeating themselves that we've witnessed up to this point, is what we saw in the beginning of this video. The Dark Soul, presumably, builds a home for himself, after which someone, presumably the White Soul, finds him and burns down his home, forcing the Dark Soul to flee and find a new place to live. The many burning homes that we see flash by suggest that this has happened several times already, which could only mean that this cycle is the loop that this code is referring to. And with the code commanding the loop to be broken, this reinforces the idea that the Dark and White Soul will have to make peace and possibly combine into one again in order for them to be remedied and set free. So, after watching all these videos, I've hopefully been able to cultivate a decent idea of what's going on in this ARG. However, there's still one thing I have neglected to cover up to this point, the second part of the code presented in the video periodic. Quick recap in case you forgot. By decoding this string of encrypted text that appeared on screen in that video using a periodic table cipher, we were led to a page on the platform GitHub containing the message "Hunger comes in waves" and then a string of unintelligible writing, presumably more code. The word waves contained an embedded text file with another coded message and some kind of key or clue to deciphering it. And the reason I've delayed talking about this code until now is that I honestly haven't been able to solve it. It seems pretty easy, right? Like, oh, the key is right there. But of course, it's never that simple. Plainly applying this substitution system to this text results in this, which doesn't really seem like much more of a solution than the initial encoded message. So my first thought was, oh, they're trying to pull a fast one on me. What if we actually have to use this key the opposite way around? However, that approach has its own significant problems. There is notably no letter A on the right side of this apparent key, while there is an A in the code accompanying the initial text. But how is this possible? There are only 26 letters in the alphabet, so where did the A go? Well, as we take a closer look, we can start to see that between the left and right side of the key, multiple letters from the left side map to the same letter on the right side. This notably happens with F and Q, who both translate to L, O and W both translate to J, A and U both translate to P, and finally S, T and C all translate to Q. Since the same letters are thus used multiple times on the right side, or the results side of the key, this means that there are 5 letters that go completely unused on the resulting side, and as such these letters could not appear in the final decoded message. These missing letters are A, B, E, I and S. Considering these are some of the most frequently used letters in the English language, and presumably many other languages as well, it seems more and more likely that something fishy is going on and that things aren't what they seem. But if we can't trust this hint, then what can we trust? And how could we feasibly even solve this? That question has eluded me for some time, and it still does now since I haven't been able to find the right answer yet. But I've tried. I started looking through every method of encryption I could find on Wikipedia, and one of the ones that really stood out to me was the Vignere cipher, which is where you use both the plain text and a key to encrypt the message, such that every letter essentially conforms to its own uniquely shifted alphabet. Since we've been given 2 letters already, I tried to work out which letter all these combinations conformed to, and added these letters as another step. So, for example, the letter A was paired with the letter P, so that would result in the letter P. The letter B is paired with the letter M, so this would result in the letter N, since the alphabet for B is shifted by 1 compared to the alphabet for A. So instead of replacing B with M when decoding the message, I would instead replace it with N. But that didn't work either, even though I felt pretty confident in it. But then I found a method that I was even more confident in. Introducing the Buford cipher, which is really just a slightly different Vignere cipher. What really caught my eye about this method is that this cipher is what is known as a reciprocal cipher, which basically means something along the lines of that you can decode the text the exact same way that you encode it. Now that I think about it, the Vignere cipher wasn't listed as a reciprocal cipher, so maybe that one actually is the right answer, but I just didn't decode it right. Like I said, I know nothing. Anyway, decryption using the Buford cipher is almost exactly the same as the Vignere cipher. But whereas with the Vignere cipher you go off of the columns and rows, with the Buford cipher you work from the column down to the letter from the key, and then look at the corresponding row for the result. But that wasn't it either. Like I said, I was really confident that one of these was gonna be it. So, when they weren't, I was genuinely at a loss. For real this time. I had and still have no idea what other method I could use to approach this. I started doing some weird shit afterwards, trying to decipher the code. Like, I noted how many spaces were between each letter on both sides of the key, and then used that number to come up with a new letter from the alphabet. Didn't work. I even tried to disregard this hint altogether and use a frequency analysis, basically comparing the frequency of each letter within the message with the frequency of each letter within the English language and assigning letters based on that. Also didn't work. At this point I was kind of losing it, and I even started reasoning that since the message stated "hunger comes in waves", I should apply this key to the message multiple times until something happened. Alas, that also didn't work, as it just started repeating itself by the time I reached the 12th cycle. Thus, I threw in the towel and just started working on this video. And hey, it wouldn't be as fun when I now start spoiling all the mysteries for you, no? Also, to go off script briefly, about a month after the creation of this GitHub page, one day the message on the page was randomly changed to say "hunger comes with rage", and the original message and the text file are now only accessible through the update logs on the page. So what is this meant to signify? You know, maybe this is the creator's way of signifying that someone has solved the code and maybe obtained some kind of, you know, one-time premium to another step or something. Regardless, as with most other things relating to this GitHub page and the associated code in the text file, I couldn't tell you, but I thought it would be prudent, I guess, to mention it here. But even without deciphering this code, we have still gotten a pretty good idea of what's going on this channel. I think, anyway. Of course, this is all just theorizing, so it could turn out that I'm completely wrong about this as more videos come out. But the way I see it right now, this story starts with a random player stumbling upon some ruins in the forest and finding a message left by others from long ago. Whether our protagonist already has some connection to these ancients is unclear, but this might be something later videos will expand on. Who were these people? What do they have to do with everything that's going on? We have no idea about this yet. The player follows the directions he's been given by the book and the compass he found within the ruins. His journey towards what the compass is pointing to and what he's actually trying to reach are probably the biggest blind spots of this theory right now. As far as what happens, currently I suspect that the player finds the hiding place or prison of some monster or entity. Something goes wrong, which causes the player's soul to be split in two and all three entities to be trapped in another world or plane of existence. From this point on, things become simpler. The monster entity just kind of seems to hang out, while the dark and light half of the soul are trapped in a vicious cycle, with the white soul constantly seeking to destroy the black soul, which it perceives as evil, tracking him, burning down his homes and trying to kill him. The only way to break this loop and escape this world of suffering and perhaps even beat or steal away this monstrous entity is for the dark and light halves of the soul to make peace and join once again, remedying this soul that's been broken. Or at least that's what I think. Like I said before, this whole video is basically just one giant theory, and given how much we still don't know, the story of this ARG is sure to change in the future, either proving or disproving this proposed storyline I just laid out. Probably disproving, to be honest. So, now that we've arrived at the end of this video, it's time for you to do your part and watch these videos on this channel to see what you can discover. Several new videos have been released since I started work on this video, and though I haven't watched them yet,
that's the most shit I've ever seen.
They seem to detail the protagonist's journey towards wherever the Solar Sphere is pointing him, which is very significant as to whether my theory will be proven right or wrong. So now it's your turn to venture into the unknown and deduce how what you see in these new videos makes sense given everything I just spent however long talking about. Also, if someone could please help to figure out this code, that would be very appreciated, because if I go at this again and it still doesn't work out, I might genuinely be going insane.